I think you should have a mic, don't you?
Yes. He's got opinions, so.
Yeah. Well, I know you thought you were going to get to start. But can we talk about the dog first?
Well, see, what we said is we were going to be our fully authentic selves.
That's
And
what I
for
mean.
me, that involves a dog and should have a ball cap. You need to put your fedora on. And I can tell you were also going to wear your wind pants and tennis shoes, but Mindy would not let you out of the house that way. And so all we get is the fedora.
Yes. So back to the dog. Do you have a letter from your doctor that, recommends
I am a
that you
doctor.
have your...
That's your fault that I'm a doctor.
I mean, you have your emotional support animal, right, with you?
I am his transport human. That's the way this relationship works.
So Freud would call this a transitional object.
Do we believe in Freud?
Provided it's not integration, yes.
Okay, so as long as we just full on accept it and we don't integrate it, it's okay.
Yes.
Carson, I need your help. All right, so trying to guess, Dr. Williams asked me when we started, it's like, how is this going to go? And I said, what's going to happen is I'm going to ask you the first question that we wrote down, and then you're going to do whatever it is that you're going to do with it, and I'm going to ride the rodeo for the next hour. We didn't even get to the first question. But the rationale for this talk is in many ways, the story of Dr. Williams and myself is the story of Southeastern's counseling program where it is right now. Because 25 years ago, your first semester as a professor was my second semester as a student. And in that season of my life, I did not aspire. I'm not going to say that you're old. I'm just going to say that was 25 years ago and I'm old. But I did not really aspire to be a counselor at that point. And so this whole thing is your fault. The person that I heard counseling as a viable ministry for the church, like I just felt called to ministry and I came to seminary to see what form that might take. And hearing your interactions and experiences with people was very much what shaped and drew me in that direction. And so one of the things I would be curious just for you to share to kind of narrate how we got here is you were a counselor before you were a biblical counselor. If biblical counseling is ice cream, you've been several different flavors over the course of that period of time. And it's not just that you have grown as an individual who is a counselor, it's that largely as you've changed and grown, our department has changed and grown alongside of you. And so for these good folks who haven't heard the story from counselor to various flavors of biblical counselor and where you are now, just kind of give that journey as it depicts particularly the program at Southeastern.
Yeah. Well, it actually started before being a Christian counselor. I was a pagan, unchristian psychologist, and then got saved right near the end of graduate school. And but really initially thought that faith and practice were really different things. And so I, for the most part, would leave my faith outside of the office and pick that back up, in the evenings or on Sunday. And it didn't take very long in practice before I saw I just can't do that and still call myself a Christian. And so began trying to, put things together and went through, I think, what one of our guests here, Eric Johnson, would call naive integration phase, a weak integration phase. And then a friend of mine at church said, Sam, you'd probably love this book. And it was a systematic theology book called Christian Theology by Millard Erickson. I'd never read such a thing. I did grow up in the church, and I knew all the Bible bits, I knew the gospel, I knew the Bible for the most part, but systematic theology was absolutely transformative to me because it gave me a conceptual system that would match up with all of my years of study in psychology. And so I was able then to begin to put these things together. And then the next step was reading a chapter by David Pallison and another chapter in a book called Power Religion by Ed Welsh. And I just thought, wow, this is a very unique way of thinking about the interface between Christianity and my psychology stuff. And never read anything like that. And then, by God's providence, ran into David at a World AACC conference in 1997, and started a relationship with him. The next year, met Jay Adams, started a relationship with him. Met another guy named Sid Galloway, a really radical Jeremiah character that none of you probably heard of. Was very active in the BC world back in those days. And then after that, met Eric Johnson. And so I've really had the good fortune of having met and spent time with just some literal geniuses and just really, really sincere Christ followers. So that's really kind of been my journey, and it has shifted some here, and by God's grace, I get to listen to you and Kristen and some of my colleagues here, and it's just amazing. It really is a God thing. Why He used me, He's got a great sense of humor. So is it my turn now? Is that what we're
I think that's how that works with fear and trepidation.
So most of you know that Brad has been really, he's a counselor for the church. Oh. And you have on your website, through your writing, just provided many, many, many resources for the church. You're in a wonderful church in this area of the Summit. And, great platform. But what do you think about where the church is at with respect to the care of souls? How are we doing? How would you grade, in general, the evangelical churches that you know of? How are we doing?
It's a good question. It's a broad question. Kind of one of the plumb line statements for me is the gospel speaks to both sin and suffering. It just speaks to them differently. The gospel offers forgiveness and freedom for sin. It offers comfort and meaning amid suffering. And so if we're asking about the struggles that people face, and if you've got a kid in school, and you can ask the generic question like, how's your kid doing in school? You might give a cumulative GPA of like 3.2. But then you can kind of go class by class. I think historically the church has done a lot better in the sphere where people have personal agency over their life struggles. Because a directive model of care, when people's life struggle emerges from their beliefs and values and choices, like the category of sin, repentance, faith, thought change, tends to map onto those things really well. The area of suffering, I think we're just a little more clumsy there. Like we have categories like lament, but what it looks like to measure progress. Like if I have an area that I'm responsible for, it's much more to incrementally go, well, how often am I struggling? How intense is the struggling? How long does the struggle last by duration? With suffering, I can't impact those things as much. And so kind of church at large, I think we do well. I think we struggle to define roles. To me, that's a big deal. Like, you know me, I'm a categories person, as much as you're not a categories person. But probably the form of care that's most accessible in the life of the church is friendship. The vast majority of care and counseling that happens in and through a church doesn't happen by appointment, would never use intake forms, doesn't take case notes. It happens in prayer times after small group. It happens in coffee shops and phone calls. And, that's really the part of church life that I get most excited about enriching. It's the hardest part to quantify. Because as soon as you start measuring that stuff and trying to track it in some way, it's almost like you kill it. Once we move into more formal areas of care of like, what is it that a pastor does by way of shepherding? And the unique advantages and roles that the spiritual authority that a pastor would have, and how that can be used to aid and bless. And when does sometimes that spiritual authority make it harder for certain types of care to be expressed? And then you get into like lay counseling as that individual groups, parachurch. And usually once we get to that level, things become more competitive and debative than I like. And instead of looking at how do the strengths of these various forms of care complement one another, how can we maximize the strengths, minimize the weaknesses, use one form of care to kind of subsidize and strengthen the weaknesses of another, we start asking like, which one is the form of care that Paul did in Ephesus when he planted the church there? We don't always ask it in that way, but kind of that tone of the way to do it, I think leads us to become more contested than is viable. And then we start arguing about counseling instead of helping people. And I don't enjoy that at all.
So you're a pastor of counselor, and you're a counselor, but in terms of that interaction, pastors and counselors, especially if that counselor is separate from your church, what would you have to tell us about how to maximize those two roles? Like you said, they're different hats, different categories. How do you think they can interact best for God's glory and the sake of our people in our churches?
So I did spend about 10 years in a parachurch setting before I was a pastor of counseling. So in that setting, I got to know a stranger from a set of intake forms forward. And my relationship with that individual lasted as long as their problem persisted and they found me helpful. If their problem went away or I was not perceived as helpful, the relationship ended. And trying to think through as one who had a heart for the church of, at the very least, as kind of towards the end of counseling, of being able to ask somebody, who do you have in your life that you could be as honest with as you've been with me over the last several weeks or months? If you look at studies on the effectiveness of change, the quality of relationship that somebody has outside of counseling, that level of support is huge. Well, as a Christian counselor, as one that has a heart for the church, of asking that question of going, who am I passing the baton to? Because as much as I like you and respect you and admire your courage of coming here and working on things, I kind of hope I never see you again. Like that would be the best compliment that you could give if there was no reason to come back. Who are the people in your life that are going to carry that? Of listening to when, I think this would be a great conversation for you to have with your pastor. For their pastor to talk to me, I would need a release of information. For me to hear something that makes for a great question, of like, I think that could be a really fruitful dialogue. And even though I was seminary trained, there was times when it might be good for me to turn down the knob on the shepherding-esque nature of what happened in counseling so that I could turn it up between this person and the one that was going to shepherd their soul long term. Mm-hmm. In that kind of parachurch setting, but there's frequently where you'll have somebody where you can tell they're pretty close to coming to faith. Like they're an unbeliever. They're in counseling as they grapple with the hard things of life. They're starting to wrestle with those questions. This is purely a approach thing for me. You don't have to adopt it, but it fits with what we were just saying. If I was in the parachurch and that was the situation, honestly, I would do my best not to be the one to lead this person to Christ. That question of who are the people in your life that would be really excited about the conversation that we're having right now? Like, who are the people that if they knew we were talking, they would smile and you could just tell they'd be like, yes, yes. I would much rather them have that moment of coming to faith with somebody who was going to be an ongoing part for the rest of their life than somebody who was just a counselor. And recognizing the limits that came with being in just a counselor role, there were times when it's like, as much as I would want to enjoy and celebrate, and when they come back, I'm totally going to ask, and if they didn't do it, then we'll have that conversation. I shepherded their soul best in a parachurch setting by being content to be a parachurch resource and point them to the church in those kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the more I started to think creatively about how that could be done, I enjoyed my role, the benefit to the counselee, their relationship with the church, the trust from those church towards the parachurch center that I was a part of. It really was, I found, to be a quality, beneficial. Everybody liked it better that way.
Yeah, wonderfully interactive.
Right.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean a lot of phone calls between me and the pastor. Like, I would have needed permission that wasn't necessarily needed for what was going on, but I could connect and serve and come alongside through that power of suggestion. Mm-hmm. So I'll pitch another question your way. That you've been doing the counseling thing for a while. And in a room like this, one of the questions that we have, or we wouldn't be here, is how do we become better counselors? Mm-hmm. Like, we want to improve, we want to grow, we want to be refined. The longer you do counseling, you try a lot of things. You try books, you try conversations, you do conferences, you do exercises with counselees. And so I think something all of us would be curious to hear. What are the things as you tried to grow as a counselor that it surprised you how much it benefited you? Like, the return on investment for the type of growth was like, I got a lot more from that than I thought I would. And
Sure.
What were the things that were at least mildly disappointing? Like, I thought this would grow me more, and at least for you, it just didn't quite do the trick.
Sure. Yeah, I have two very different items there on my list of things that, wow, I didn't realize this could be so helpful. And the first is almost, I'm almost ashamed to say, which is just the potency of prayer in my counseling sessions. And 5 or 10 years ago, I really began to realize how much impact an invocational prayer, that's an old word, a prayer by which we call on God, we call on the Spirit. And I realized how much that very, very honest, heartfelt prayer on my part for this divine appointment, and I mean that literally, made a difference to me and my counselee. It's kind of like it set the table just right. Eric Judson, one of our guests I've already referred to, was talking about counseling as a trialogue, that it's not just two people in this counseling session. God is present and here with us. And I think acknowledging that by means of heartfelt prayer for this time, for my counselee, for myself, it really landed on me 5 to 10 years ago, just how potent that was, when on occasion I was unable to do that for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes a person was not comfortable with that. And then when that wasn't present. I could do it in my head, in my own mind, but I just noticed that the table wasn't set as well without acknowledging God's presence. And then the other thing is that how many times just after that opening prayer, I would look up and my counselee already is working. God's already at work on them. They have tears running down their cheeks. And so I think that just the potency of acknowledging God's presence, interacting with him triologically, like I said, it's almost, I should be ashamed to realize it took me this long to really recognize just how important, how potent that is. So that would be one thing, and I would just highly recommend interacting with God and your client. It's a small group, right? And very potent. Second thing I would say, quite different, is my background and training as a psychologist was primarily by means of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, insight-oriented depth therapies. And that's what I did early on most in my career. I had an aversion for the behavioral therapies because I thought they were superficial. And but quite honestly, over time, the longer I've practiced, the more I have moved in the direction of the behavioral therapies, probably especially third wave behavioral therapy. Some of you are familiar with that, and that means things like acceptance and commitment therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and all that stuff. And integration, I find, is not too complex with a behavioral method, provided I have it mapped onto a theistic epistemology and then a biblical anthropology, what Dr. Kellen spoke with us about this morning. And then I have true north set, which is my goal with this counselee, is to help them to love Jesus better, follow him better, love the key people in their life better. And if I have those pieces in place, then I can extract a method, like I said, especially third wave behavioral methods. And I've found them just honestly very helpful. That's God's common grace. I'm thankful for what I've learned from Stephen Hayes and Russell Harris about these methods. So I think those are a couple of things that have just really jumped out on me, and I've been extremely pleased with how helpful and effective they are. Yeah. So, you deal with, some of you know this about Brad, some of you don't. So Brad's in a pretty significant, large church, 12,000 people across 12 campuses or something like that. And he's incredible in managing crises. Now, don't go advertise him. He's not looking for more. But his capacity, his capacity to think through the worst of situations where people are hurt, where people are getting arrested, just the worst things you could imagine going on in a church. His capacity to respond to these things, shepherd people, both parishioners, members, and his own staff, the staff there, pastors there at the summit, is just stunning, both in its effectiveness. I get to kind of sit on the sideline sometime, and Brad will vent a little bit with me when his emotional support animal isn't around. And and so talk with us a little bit about that. And both, I think two things. How are you so good at that? How do you make that work? And then second, how do you deal with that level of trauma and drama?
Yeah, so I think in some ways, as I reflect on that, it picks up on the question I ask you of like, what's something that's been immensely beneficial in shaping me as a counselor? And it's been having conversations with people who don't do what I do. And so getting to talk with psychiatrists and social workers and law enforcement officers, and taking the time to get to know how is what you do different from what I do. A project that I was really excited and pleased with the outcome that kind of fits in this is the Becoming a Church That Cares Well for the Abused project. When you look at that, there's 9 or 10 of us that contributed to that, and you have somebody from law enforcement detective background, an attorney, social worker, like you have a whole host of professions there. And part of the way that I want to be a biblical counselor is not to assume that people who happen not to do biblical counseling are doing bad things. They're just doing something different than what I do. Like, what is it that you do? And the thing is, when you're in a crisis, there's going to be a lot of different relevant jurisdictions. And you need to understand what those different jurisdictions do. Law enforcement is its own jurisdiction. Social work is its own jurisdiction. Part of what I realized was kind of going to be my unique role in those kinds of situations is, I might call it interdisciplinary competence. Like just that awareness between that. If there wasn't somebody there to conduct the choir of the different people involved, and some of them don't want really to follow the conductor, but like it's not that I'm leading them, it's that I understand them well enough that with the church, I can translate, this is why they're doing it that way. Okay, in this meeting, we just said that. This is why it made them uncomfortable. It's not because they don't like the church. It's because we just violated a protocol for them that, we don't need to do that again, okay? Because when you have one of those big, messy crises, you're going to have all of those different circles overlapping. And as church leaders, we often don't know how to lead when we're not out front. If we're not in charge of the care case. And so being in a parachurch setting for over 10 years, I was often an auxiliary part of the care plan. Mm-hmm. Even like when churches would refer to me and it was part of their restorative church discipline process, I was auxiliary. I got pretty comfortable being auxiliary. It's kind of awesome what you can pull off when you're comfortable being an auxiliary figure in that who's helping harmonize what's going on. And then when those other jurisdictions realize that you're not getting in their way, that you understand and appreciate why they're there and what they've got going on, they start to trust you a little more. That person who is the one receiving care, most of this has been about the church leadership part of it, they get confused. They're hearing mixed messages. Why is the social worker telling me this thing, and this person's telling me the other, and my pastor's telling me this? Well, it's not always because they disagree with one another. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's because they're centering a different element of care. And just for them to go, okay, because they don't just have the fog of 3, 4, 5 different voices telling them what ought to happen. They have the fog of their own being overwhelmed with the experience that everybody's trying to help them with. And when you take the time, that's where if I could give my answer of just talk with people who do things you don't do. Be really curious and learn about the ways that they get to be salt and light influences where they are. And so that's maybe the first part of your question. The second part, one, it just kind of the authentic human level. It's hard. Like if I say, here are some things that are helpful. Helpful doesn't mean not hard. Like you can answer a question like that, and if I go, here's 2 or 3 things that I do, and you think if I do those 2 or 3 things, it's not going to be hard. That's a lie. If you do it as well as you can do it, and you're in the midst of a crisis on a regular basis, it's going to sit on you.
Yeah.
And so, one thing for me, being a counselor or being a biblical counselor, it's what I do, it's not who I am. And for different reasons, for different ones of us, that may be a hard distinction for us to make. I am very grateful for the moments that I get to be meaningfully involved in the hardest parts of other people's lives and try to be an agent of hope and change and direction in those moments. I also really like taking my wife on a date, coaching my son's baseball team, and taking Rookie for a walk in the woods. And like separating who I am from what I do that's a really big part. Also, being honest about how crises impact me. Like the 2 biggest factors for me is, can I focus on a project? Like normally, just the way I'm wired, I can turn from one project to the next pretty easily. I can tell there's seasons where it's like, I'm a little glitchy. Like I can't string together words and thoughts the way that I want to. The other thing that I look at, and it's like the telltale sign for me, is how I come in after I mow the yard. Mowing the yard is a very passive activity. It's about an hour of me being alone with my thoughts. That's a time when I get a pretty good read on where I'm at, and I need to have the humility, integrity, and honesty to say if I'm not in a good place, I need to be honest up the org chart, and I need to do the things in terms of self-care and don't deride myself as saying those things are weakness. I get to be a human being too.
Yeah. So you have an emotional support animal and an emotional support lawnmower. That's the key right there, my friends. So, yeah.
So, question here, moving it from you, the counselor, to us, the counseling department. That you've been here 25 years. Thank you. Can y'all join me in saying thank you? In terms of giving honor to whom honor is due, there's a deep sense of gratitude for the way that you've invested, not just in an institution, in a program, in an academic system, but in students like me and Dr. Kellen and many, many others over decades here. And so as you look at where we are, what are the things that you look at and you go, I like that. I hope that never changes. If anything about that ever changes, I just hope it becomes deeper and richer and more of what it is. And what are the things that you say, I think this is next. These are the areas of refinement if we're going to continue to become what you would want us as stewards of your life and legacy to do with this. Like, just talk to the children. Tell us what you see.
Yeah, thank you. I think the big thing, one of our, I can't remember if it was Dr. Kellen or Dr. Brooks that mentioned it already, is I am absolutely thrilled with how serious we take the mission of God into the mental health world. That's a big, big deal to me. I can't imagine anything that is honestly Christian that is not sending and going. If we think we have a form of counseling that is unique in its truthfulness and its effectiveness, then how on earth could we keep that to ourselves? That's distinctly unchristian to do so. So I really do think we ought to take Jesus seriously in the Great Commission. Go make disciples, because I'm going to be with you every step of the way until the end. And so I really believe that our missiological focus is crucial, which of course is totally connected to our Christology, which is all of it connected to our understanding of who God is and what he's up to on this planet. So I just really think that this willingness that we have to send people here, there, and everywhere, whether that's into the private psychiatric hospital, and we have some students there in Raleigh, private practice, to China, to Brazil, to Iran, all over. And so I think that's probably one of the most gratifying things for me. In terms of where we go from here, I think that probably one of the biggest challenges that we have is providing opportunities for students in the learning process to witness, hear, observe expert counselors. This is very difficult to accomplish in an educational setting. Dr. Kellen, Kelsey, we've all labored and tried to understand, how do we really not just teach you, but that saying that many things are not just taught, but they're caught by observation, by witnessing, by presence, by watching. And I think that's a huge challenge in this world of counseling, where confidentiality and privacy are on the one hand honored and very important, and understandably so, but how do we bridge that divide? And so I think that's a huge challenge that is still out there ahead of us, quite frankly. So, yeah.
So can I double up on you here?
Sure.
All right. So you mentioned earlier, you actually made me jealous. You mentioned a long list of people that you've had the opportunity to develop friendships with. And a few of those friendships I've gotten to observe you in. And some people, like, I'm a hardcore introvert. Sometimes I just develop relationships. Dr. Williams is much better at developing friendships. So just getting to observe conversations between you and David Pallison. Like, there was a dear friendship shared between the two of you. Talk about relationship with Jay Adams and Ed Welch and Eric Johnson and many people in this sphere of evangelical Christian counseling that, not with a recency bias, but with the perspective of 2-3 decades of participating conversation, not just getting to know books, but the people who had hearts that they were trying to express in those books. It's easy for many of us to be in moments that this one might be a bit of a crunchy moment that we're in. With that perspective that you have, is there any kind of big picture drawing on that experience and relationships that you would have, that you would offer on the situation or guidance to us as we navigate those waters?
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to this. I've learned from all these guys, and I've had the good fortune of also knowing them personally. So, they taught me a lot by means of listening to them as they speak in conferences and whatnot. And in reading their books. I remember when I first read David Pallison. I remember when I first read Eric Johnson's Foundations for Soul Care. And if you haven't, you should. Just set a whole year aside for you to read it and really digest it. And but So I've learned a lot, but back to this, I think just as much was caught as was taught from these persons, because they really did. David literally welcomed me into his home a couple of times, spent weekends with him, asked 1,000, but what about this? But what about this? But what about this? Questions that he fielded. Meeting Jay Adams was a unique surprise in many ways. I went into psychology as a replacement for Christianity. I abandoned the faith when I was 21, much to the chagrin of my wonderful mother and father. And as I was going to graduate school, that was in 1978, I was home. My mom and I have had an ongoing conversation since I was 2, so for 69 years now. And she said, Sam, I want you to read this book. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, I was visiting home, and she shoved this book across the kitchen table to me called Competent to Counsel. And I'm not a Christian. I'm not even liking Christian stuff. And I read that book and I was absolutely incensed. And I wrote Jay Adams a scathing letter. Well, in 1998, I walked into the annual Biblical Counseling Conference in Little Rock, Arkansas, and this big old guy that looks like Santa Claus and smiles like him says, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Sam Williams. Who are you?" And he said, "Jay Adams." I said, I wrote you a letter once. I don't know if you remember that. He did not, thank God. And he said, "So what do you do?" And he said, "Well," I said, "I'm a psychologist in Lake Charles, Louisiana." He said, "I am so glad you're here." And we began, you know how some friends you have just once a year? But it's sweet and wonderful seeing them once a year, and you look forward to that. And that's how it became as I would go to these annual conferences with Jay Adams. Just super friendly and kind. And I could go on. Ed Welsh has been so kind to me, and some of that exhibited when I would take one of my kids to a conference, and Ed would come over and spend time with my son. I think we're made in the image of God, right? In the image and likeness of this incredibly, irretrievably relational God. And it's no wonder that so much is caught as much as is taught. And so I think that those are some of the things that have really just been a blessing, the way that God has orchestrated this. And I'm grateful. One more Jay Adams story. So in 1999, he and I were plenary speakers at Southern Seminary. There was this thing called the Southern Baptist Association of Biblical Counselors. Do you remember that?
The SBABC?
That's it, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So Southern Seminary was not doing the BC thing at that time, and so we were invited to go there, and Jay Adams was a plenary speaker, and I was the other plenary speaker. So I was like, wow, this is cool. I get to be on the docket with this guy. And so then afterward, we went to dinner, and I thought, I have the opportunity. I was sitting next to him to ask a good question. And so I thought I need to have a question that's really intelligent because he's a really smart guy. So I'm thinking about Augustine. And at the end of Augustine's life, he wrote this little booklet called Retractiones. All the stuff I said that I wish I wouldn't have. I would have done it differently. So I asked Jay Adams, I said, so if you were to write, at that point he had written about 60 books. If you were to write a Retractiones, what would you put in it? And he thought, about 30 to 45 seconds. And then he looked me dead in the eye and he said, nothing. And he meant it. And I was impressed in two very different ways by that. I thought, wow, so you're like inerrant, like the Bible? I've never met a person like this. But then his next comment helped me to also appreciate that very unique statement, which was that he said, I've always tried really hard to stay close to the scriptures. So the basis of that, perhaps overconfidence, maybe, was I've always tried to stay really close to the scriptures. So, yeah.
So do we get to ask each other what our retracciones is, or did I just order something at an Italian restaurant? No, that statement that I made earlier about kind of a plumb line for ministry, that the gospel speaks to both sin and suffering, it speaks to them differently. That painful experience that we all should make ourselves do of going back and listening to things that we've taught. I remember listening to a presentation that I did. It was on the subject of depression. And if you had asked me at the time that I gave the presentation, what were you trying to do? I would have said I was trying to be compassionate towards those who were suffering. And as I listened to it, I was like, my tone of voice, I think, did what I was aiming to do. My verbs didn't. I had a soft voice. I had friendly eyes. I had sin verbs. All I had in the presentation were, this is where your thinking is wrong. This is what needs to be clarified. This is what you would be seeing in error. Consider these things. Look at these areas of your life. And I didn't have an answer for it. It just shook me. I don't like how that sounded. As one who also tries to stay close to Scripture, I can distinctly remember that being a very uncomfortable moment and something that very much shaped an emphasis that I am more content with in this season than I would have been had I not gone through that.
So my retracciones has a financial edge to it. So in my fantasy world, if I ever won the lottery, I would find all of my students.
I was the first.
In the first 2 years of teaching, and I would refund all their money for my classes.
It's 4 semesters.
It was cheaper back then.
Thank you for the Southern Baptist Cooperative Program for subsidizing the education. It is
That's right.
greatly
I'd
appreciated.
have to refund 40% to the cooperative program. Yeah. So most of you know that Brad Hambrick's last name is .com, right?
It's actually a jingle. .com.
So Brad loves to write. I do not. I find it arduous and boring. I'd much rather talk to people and teach people. But Brad's really good at it, and he likes to write. Tell us a little bit about that process. Some of our audience here is into writing, and they want to write, and God will use them in that way. And you've been at this for writing seriously for a dozen years maybe? And what would you say to folks that maybe are, not where you're at, speaking to them? What have you learned in this process? What are the challenges? And, what could they learn from some of your process there?
Yeah. So before process, maybe a couple of other things that come to mind. It's important to enjoy writing. Don't enjoy being published. If you don't enjoy writing, publication becomes this torturous goal. Like write because it helps you understand life. Write because it helps you help people. Don't write because you want to be published. When it comes to me in writing, I think for a lot of us, maybe especially those prone to writer's block, we have a tendency to want to write to explain. We want to know what needs to be said before we say it, and then just put it on paper. I don't know that I have ever been able to write that way. I write to explore. I don't write to explain. I have questions that I find really interesting, and paper is where I explore them, or laptop screen. And don't be afraid of failing. Like I have a file of just didn't work. That's what it's called, like the folder, didn't work. Started, didn't finish. That's not failure. That was just something that didn't go anywhere. I went back sometimes and get things out of that. And it was like, this was just the piece that I couldn't find at that time to go. Like it's almost like a video game. You need that one tool that you can't find in Zelda, then it locks the door and takes you the rest of the way. And it was just, I started working on that 7 years before I found the silver key. And so enjoy writing. My suggestion, write to explore. I think a humorous anecdote here, how BradHambrick.com got started, I find to be an amusing story. So I was down in Augusta, Georgia. That's where the Parachurch Counseling Center was that I started, or I didn't start, but where I started. And I would do seminars because it was a nice change of pace when you're a counselor to get to do some teaching. It was good for my own mental health. It helped with referrals. And there was this one young guy, his name was Wes. He was a high school rebel of the high nerd variety. So when the internet was brand new, he hijacked his principal's computer and left a message for him on his screensaver and still loved to tell the story of that detention well into his adult life. Well, he came to faith. And then he was just a natural evangelist. And so when I would do events on different hardships of life, he always had a friend that needed it in some variety. And so he was there with a friend. And he used my counseling seminars as part of his evangelistic efforts. And I don't know how many he had been to. But one day he came up to me after that. It would have been on a Tuesday. He said, I'm going to come by your office next Tuesday. What kind of sub sandwich do you want? You need to have a blog. I'm going to make it for you. I was like, I'll take a meatball sub. He came by next Tuesday with a meatball sub from Firehouse. He said, this is WordPress. And you need to start doing this. I was like, okay. And that was, in some way, it was this young Christian who just was being a bit prophetic and bold, and I want to serve you and help you do this. And he kicked me out of the nest. He was like, you should write some of this stuff down. And it was low pressure because it wasn't my idea. Nobody was reading it, so if it was bad, that was fine. I kind of used it as a tool just to network in that local community. And thought, as I do things that could be tools that instead of like restating things case after case, I could summarize some things, make it a little more accessible so that I was being a better steward of the time and resources that people were investing in counseling here. And the fact that it started small and it wasn't a huge aspiration and it wasn't trying to go anywhere, it was just a tool that could be stewarded. And over time, it kind of grew into something more than I ever would have thought it would be when I was eating that meatball sub. And so enjoy the process. Feel free to explore. And Fear not trying more than you fear failing.
That's good. Yeah. So let me do another one here, and maybe I can ramp off of that. You are a relatively public figure in this, one world, this part of the world that we're in, of Christian and biblical counseling, and on occasion you get some adversarial feedback, we'll say. You get some flack comes at you. Zombie priests might be one of those things. What have you learned from that, and how does God work on you in that zone? I've seen you go through some periods where you've had a lot of stuff come at you. So how do you manage that? What do you do with that?
Yeah, so in those discussions, one of the words used, not just for me, but people like me, is dangerous. Never in my life have I considered myself a dangerous person. I tell my mother that, and she laughs out loud. And so there is a sense in which my take, oftentimes we have second or third tier theological differences that are being treated as if they're first tier issues. If I categorize it that way, it at least allows me to listen a little slower. Of like, okay, if they're giving it first tier heat, if I slow it down to a third tier speed, what could I learn if this was being brought to me at a third tier decibel level? If any of you saw recently, I did a webinar with a friend who's more of the Nouthetic tradition, where I invited him to critique one of my books. And one of the conversations we were having was, in his word for what I had written, was that it was permissive. Like, you're being too slow to address theological error in this area of life. I was like, well, I think my term for that is patient. The line between permissive and patient isn't always clear. And this guy's a great guy. And on a public webinar, we spent about 20 minutes just talking that out. That's somebody who, I want to find people like that within the camps that may view me as dangerous. Because if I can't take it from a first tier to a third tier, and I've got somebody that I know and trust, I'm like, can you translate this for me? Can you help me understand? I'm having a hard time not being distracted by the heat or the volume. Help me get that. And then for folks here in a setting like this, my encouragement to you on those things, be good at what you do. Recognize you're not going to be for everybody. Be faithful. Be as excellent as you can be as a counselor. When you have counseling cases that go well, your counselee is going to give you more credit than you deserve. And when counseling goes poorly, they're going to give you more blame than you deserve. In the public discourse, it's the same effect. And so that sense of trying to gauge, how do I not get too high on a compliment and too low on a criticism? That same thing that we use to buffer a counselee that gives us too much credit, or one where we're like, I know I didn't I could have done better, but it wasn't that bad. That same buoy system that you have for your heart with a client, do that in public discourse if it comes up as well.
Yeah. I don't remember if it was, I don't remember where I heard this, perhaps it was Stephen, that we have a tendency in our little part of the world, which is very much, unfortunately, mimicking the part of the world out there, to engage in first-tier battles over third-tier issues. And really doesn't make good sense. So I think that's great. Feedback is know at what level are you operating? Somehow let's not forget that I think Jesus said, blessed are the warmongers, right? Or is it blessed are the peacemakers? For they'll be called sons and daughters of God. It's a big deal. Peace among Christians, unity where it's honest and feasible among Christians is a big deal to our Lord. These are not small issues. And I'll never forget Ken Sande's line in that book that we've all read many times, many years ago. Conflict is always an opportunity to somehow glorify God. Not myself, not to be right. But if as Christians, we don't look different from others in conflict, maybe we're not. Because it's a big deal. It's a big deal to love our enemies, to overcome evil with good. So, yeah.
I think one of the things I appreciate about Southeastern, and it's also a core value at the church where I serve, the Summit, we may say it slightly differently, but it kind of boils down to this. Take the mission seriously, don't take yourself seriously. That helps a whole lot. Like, I want to be serious about what I do, how I care for, use Scripture to care for others. I don't want to take myself real seriously. And in those moments, the better we can do that, the easier it is going to be to navigate the waters of public criticism.
So thank you all a ton for putting up with us here. Brad and I have been buddies for 24 years, and I still don't understand why just in the last year he can't be around me without his emotional support animal. Is that a you problem or a me problem?
It's a rookie's wonderful issue.
He's raising a neurotic dog. Yeah, but really, honestly, thank you. And so I wanted to, this passage has been on my mind throughout our whole conference. I want to read to you from John chapter 20. And then Brad's going to close us in prayer, and then Kristen's going to come up and bid us. Oh, we're going to have some singing again, which is great. It's been wonderful. So in John chapter 20, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he'd said this, he showed him his hands and his side. And then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. And as the Father has sent me, even so I'm sending you." And when he'd said this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit."
Let's pray. Lord, you give us the great honor of being your ambassadors. And when we sit with those who are hurting times, we want to be accurate and faithful ambassadors of yours. Lord, when your disposition toward this person has come, let us reason together, because thoughts and beliefs and values need to be grappled with. We want to do that in a way that represents you. When your heart towards this person is one that says, "Come to me, you are weary and heavy laden, let's share that yoke together," we want to represent you well in that. Lord, I would pray that you would take everything that we've been a part of over the last 2 to 3 days. Just help us be a little bit better, a little bit clearer ambassador of yours to each person you allow us to counsel. In your name we pray. Amen.
Stand together and let's sing together.